folks, welcome back to My Kitten Reads. I'm Eleanor and welcome to this slightly belated July wrap up. I do apologise for the delay. I had actually prepped this last week, which was still a week late, but got distracted because my favourite driver was in the middle of winning the Formula E World Championship. So, so I spent most of my weekend watching those two races, which got him his championship. Yay, Stoffel! But yes, so I've been distracted and my wrap up is a couple of weeks late, but it is here. So in July, I read 10 books, mostly electronically, but a couple in paper. But yes, I read 10 things. So, you know, on schedule, basically. So I have been reading some more Austen variations. That's what's coming up first. I'm still sticking to my promise for the year to only include in my Goodreads account ones I haven't read before, and not rereads, because I reread them and it's so often that it's just getting a bit ridiculous. So 10 things, and the first one is a new Austen variation, because this one's from an author I know. I have been branching out into some other authors. But yes, so the first thing I read was Unbowed Takes Charge by Shana Grandison. This is I think it's like the 4th or 5th book in the Takes Charge series, which is essentially a series of books where a character that doesn't usually have a really huge backbone develops a backbone. So in this case, Unbowed develops backbone, and decides that she's going to take control of her own life. She doesn't want to marry her cousin, and she's going to encourage things elsewhere. Honestly, it's now been so long since I read it, I've kind of forgotten exactly what happened. But, you know, you get the gist. So then I was still doing some Hugo reading in July. So I read A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers, which was on the novella category. So I've only recently started reading Becky Chambers. She's a very good writer. So Psalm for the Wild Built was, I've got this listed as a queer character book because I believe the way the pronouns worked, it seems to be an agender character. So that was fun. And it was really a sweet book. It was about basically a priest, monk, basically a monk, who got restless and so taught themselves how to do tea service and started traveling around on a pedal-powered caravan bike thing, to all the various towns doing tea service, and became really, really good at it. In this world, hundreds of years ago, the AI machine robots basically sort of got to the point where they're like, we don't want to be doing your factory work anymore. Also, it's bad for you because you're not doing anything, humans. So we are going to peacefully wander off into the wilderness and separate ourselves from your society. So now human society is a lot more eco-friendly and is back, you know, doing their own work, and no one's heard anything from the AIs for a very, very long time. And this monk, after a while, even though they've become a really, really good tea service monk, gets restless again, goes off the beaten path into the wilderness, and runs across an AI who has come to see what all the humans are up to. And yeah, sort of peaceful shenanigans, but sort of, it's very introspective very much about we as a society have this thing where we need to have a purpose, and it's sort of challenging that idea. Why do you need to have a purpose to fulfill? Why is that something that we have trained ourselves as society to want? So yeah, it was very interesting, and I believe there is a sequel already out, so I might read that at some stage. So then I reread Tea and Sympathetic Magic by Tanziran Roberts. So this is the first in her Tea and Magic basically tea and sympathetic magic books, which are sort of a Regency-esque world in the teacup aisles. So it's all manners and magic and romance. And this first one, I'm actually very behind. I've only read the first two, and I'm currently rereading the second one because there are, I think, a couple more out. I'm very behind, but essentially, this first one is this Miss. I can never say it. Miss Nemi. It's some sort of really weird Greek name. Tansy, I hate you. With too many M's and N's. Seaborn, and she is very, very bored with the social season. She just wants a husband that will give her a nice library and leave her alone, basically. But her mother is throwing her at her cousin, the Duke's head. They end up going to a house party, and things end up going a bit haywire in terms of the race for the Duke's affections, and get a bit scandalous. And Nemi has to figure it all out with the help of this dark, brooding spellcracker who is working for her cousin, who she, of course, falls in love with. So that was Tea and Sympathetic Magic. Then I read another story. I can't remember if this was, I think this might have been on the novelette or maybe in the short story list, but it's Bots of the Lost Ark by Suzanne Palmer. Which felt very familiar to me when I was reading it, and I realized it's actually the follow-up to a previous short story. And essentially it's about a maintenance bot who has been woken up to on this sort of ship where all the crew are in stasis, and things have gone slightly haywire, and so the ship has woken up this bot which has a little bit of independent thought to try and figure out how are we going to manage stuff. So in this particular case, they're trying to head towards safety, but safety is sort of not really safe because it's an area of space ruled by people who don't like AI, and the crew is in stasis, and the rest of the bots have kind of decided that they are the crew, and things are going a bit strange. So this bot is once again woken up to try and save the day. So that was fun. I really, really enjoyed that. Then I started to read some non-fiction via audiobook, because I was really, really going through one of my busy periods at work where I'm doing a lot of processing work. And so having something audio is actually really helpful to help me focus, but it tends to need to be non-fiction. So I read The Scandalous Lady W by Hallie Rubenhall, which is a sort of 18th, 19th century, I think it's 18th century. At this point, I can't even remember what W stands for because it's been a while. This is why I should, do these videos on time. But it was essentially a book about the biggest divorce case in the 18th century England high society, and the woman and her husband or ex-husband who were involved in it, both leading up to the case itself, which was highly scandalous because the woman managed to, I can't believe I've forgotten her name. But anyway, she managed to convince a number of her sort of noble lovers to testify in her defense, in that her husband was aware and in some cases participatory in her scandalous behaviour, and therefore she shouldn't have to, her lover should not have to actually pay all of these damages to her husband. And it got even more scandalous when her husband won the case but was awarded a settlement of I think it was 10 shillings or something. It was barely anything. It was a pittance, a pound, 10 pounds, something like that. It was he'd asked for 20,000 and he got almost nothing because they were technically you are correct, you have been cuckolded, you should win this case, but your own behaviour is a mitigating factor. So that was fascinating. Then I have one of the books that I finished in paper, and that is Drop Bear by Evelyn. This is a poetry collection. It won this year's Stella Prize here in Australia. So the Stella Prize is for women's literature. Not women's literature, female and non-binary authors, basically. Because the Miles Franklin, which is an award named after an Australian female author, who is slightly problematic in some ways, but from early in Australia's literary history. It's named after her, but Miles Franklin is a very masculine sounding part of her name. And very few women have won the Miles Franklin. And so about a few years ago, maybe almost a decade ago, a bunch of women got together and decided we need another award to name it after Miles Franklin, but her other name, Stella, and it should be for female authors only. And then they've recently widened it out to be non-binary as well. So anyway, Evelyn won this year with this. She was the first poetry collection to win. And she's also an Indigenous author. So it was very interesting. I enjoyed it, but a lot of her poetry is not my kind of poetry. It's very free verse, which I can find difficult when words are scattered across pages and there's no real rhythm. It's not my favorite kind of poetry, but I still did enjoy it. I only did mark 1, but it was still all very interesting. She kind of interrogates the whitewashing of some of Australia's literary history. Yeah, there's political, it's very political, but you know, most Indigenous poets are political, but very definitely worth a read. So that's Drop There. Then I read another audiobook, which is, again, it was same author, Hallie Rubinold, and it was The Covent Garden Ladies. So this was a lot darker and a lot more difficult to listen to because it was essentially about the prostitution trade in Covent Garden in the late 18th century. Because there's actually a lot of documentation due to this thing called Jack's List. I think it's Jack's List, where it was essentially a book that was a listing of all the prostitutes, and it was published every year. So there's a lot of information available. A lot of it is very difficult to listen to because it's prostitution in the 18th century. It wasn't pleasant. Yeah, it's not a pleasant topic, but it's the kind of topic that unfortunately we have information, so it's one of our only ways of finding out about women, particularly non-wealthy women, in the 18th century. So it was still very interesting. It was just very difficult to listen to. Then I finished up and read Unbowed by Wangari Mathai. So this is her autobiography. It's very good. I didn't really know who she was, but she was Nigerian, born in the early part of the 20th century. So in that sort of era when they were transitioning between traditional tribal ways of living into more colonial ways of living. And then she lived, of course, through independence. And she won a Nobel Peace Prize. Mostly she was an environmentalist. She was all about she was a scientist, a biologist. She studied in America at university. She has a PhD. She was all about getting women in villages to plant trees because she could see that the damage that land clearing was doing to the natural way of things. She could see that streams were drying up because they were cutting down the fig trees that were holding the land together and therefore letting the streams bubble up without damage. and they were holding the water table together and all that kind of thing. So, but she also got very, very involved in politics and the politics of democracy, because after independence, eventually they went into a period of dictatorship, pretty much. And she was arrested. She protested. She was very much against injustice, and she was very much pro-democracy and pro-environment. And it was a really fascinating read. I really recommend it if you can get a hold of a copy. I'm not sure how in print it is. I got this from a secondhand bookstore ages ago. It's barely on Goodreads. It's like not a proper entry. So I'm not sure how available the book is, but if you can get a hold of it, it's really worth a read. I really, really enjoyed it. So then I read Milk and Honey by Rupee Kaur, which Rupee Kaur is an Instagram poet, and I was assigned to flick through this for the first week of my poetry course this semester. I ended up just reading the whole thing because it was really quick. And it's essentially, again, it's poetry. It's she's of Indian background, Indian Canadian. So she's a woman of colour. She says some very strong things. She's slightly controversial due to the whole Instagram poetry thing. But it was an interesting read. I don't know whether I'll pick up any of her other collections. Like topic wise, I was very interested in what she was writing, but her style of poetry again is not really very me. So I'm not sure if I'll read more of her. I do have to write an essay about her soon. Her and another Instagram poet who I've got no idea who that's going to be here. But yeah, so that was an interesting read. And there's been a lot of poetry this year. There's been a lot of poetry this year, which is possibly not surprising given that I've signed up for a poetry course. But even before that, I was reading poetry. And then the last thing that I read was again for the Hugo Awards, and that was Elder Race by Adrienne Tchaikovsky, which was a novella, and it was sort of a colony that had been abandoned and so had developed into sort of a feudal society, and then the scientists from Earth come and try to study, and there's only one left, and he's kind of become a wizard, and because there's a disconnect in the way that they use language. So when he tries to say he's a scientist, they get wizard, and so this girl has come to enforce the vow this wizard had made to her great-great-grandmother or whatever, because there's something that is causing problems, which seems to be some sort of interdimensional eldritch. It was a bit weird. It was okay. I mean, you know, it was a decent read, but it was probably not for me. Probably not for me. So that was the 10th thing that I read. So I read 3 books that were written by people of colour, and I read 1 book that had a main character that was on the queer spectrum, so non-binary. And yeah, it was a pretty decent reading month. Not sure what this month's going to be like. This month is going to be a lot of Jane Austen variations, to be honest. But yes, so it was a decent reading month in July, so that was great. Yeah, I've been rambling a lot. So if you want to talk about any of these books, comments below, like, subscribe, and I'll see you all again really soon.